Leadership isn't just about results, it's about who we become in the process. Hi, I'm your host Shreya, and my guest today, Sam Jump, is redefining success for high performing women by rooting it in values, not just metrics. As the founder of Powerhouse with Purpose, she empowers leaders to break free from burnout, lead with intention, and create success that feels good on the inside as it looks on outside. So, welcome, Sam. I'm honored to have you on my show.
Hi, Shreya. Thanks for having me today.
And Sam, you talk about values driven leadership. How do you define that in a world obsessed with quick wins?
Yeah, so for values driven leadership, I think it kind of goes against the idea of quote unquote quick win in that it really requires a slowing down. So it requires a slowing down, it requires a taking of internal inventory to really understand whose values you're leading from. And if they're not your values that have been driving your focuses, your intentions, your actions, then really understanding how you can shift that switch so that your values are what is driving you and your leadership and your team.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And thank you for sharing this with us. And can you recall a time when sticking to your values meant walking away from an appealing opportunity?
I have multiple examples of that. I feel like as I have grown more confident in my trust, that the world will bring me aligned opportunities and partnerships. I am more quick to say no to opportunities that come to me that aren't in alignment. So I've had either opportunities where I've turned down from the start before even like taking on a partnership or a project where I have, felt that it wasn't in alignment for one way or another, or that I'm having to convince myself to consider a role, and just those actions that really help me understand that it's not for me. And, there have definitely been times where I'm like, okay, I feel like I have this like need for the funds that would come in from this at different points in my life, and still having the courage and the confidence to know that no, this is not going to work out for me in the long run. This is actually going to end up costing me to say yes to this thing when everything within me is saying no. So I have, multiple examples of that, or even, where I am working with a team and recognizing that, maybe from the beginning, the values did seem aligned, but then you learn that their actions really don't reflect the values that they were promoting from the beginning, and having to have those tough conversations and bring those to light in a way that can maintain mutual respect and compassion in moving away from those things.
Yes, that's such a great example of how saying no can actually be deeper yes to yourself. And many high performing women struggle to avoid burnout. How do values help break that cycle?
Yeah, so I think that with values getting more of a spotlight, those kind of act as our guiding light, and those help us in formulating our values, those help us in sticking to our values. So if one of the values is self-respect, so if you're looking at personal values, say one of my personal values is self-respect, then that's going to help guide me to the boundaries that I'm setting in relationship with my work, in relationship with my business, in relationship with those in my community. And it really helps to make it more clear on the parameters around those boundaries. And so, especially when navigating burnout or trying to proactively reduce the symptoms of burnout or prevent it altogether, I think that when looking at personal values along with the values that we have in our business, they can really help make it easy to understand what that means in our partnerships with sponsors, with investors, with the team that we hire on, and be able to communicate those boundaries early on in those relationships instead of having to put out fires down the road because we're not able to be clear about them at the beginning of those relationships.
Yes, that is so wonderful. And also, is there any warning sign that someone is leading out of alignment with their values?
Yeah, I mean, we have so many of those, right? So I mean, and they show up in different ways, and I think, again, that's why it really requires a slowing down so that we can hear what's coming out from within. So whether that's, the voices in our head that are just dreading going into a work environment, or the voices in our head that are, cutting ourselves down, berating ourselves, telling ourselves that we're not enough. So, self sabotage, detachment from joy that we might have at once found in our workplace, chronic exhaustion from regularly trying to meet moving deadlines, or having inconsistency in what our role expects of us. And so, all of those things really help act as warning signs that, burnout is coming. So, especially when we get into a place of being more easily triggered, when we're feeling, really pushed up against an edge more regularly, a lot less breathing room and a lot less enjoyment. Those are all sure signs of burnout in our workplace.
Yes, that is like that a game changer using values as the compass instead of just chasing momentum.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
also, your work focuses on identity level transformation.
Mhm.
Why is that more effective than just teaching new skills?
I mean, our identity and the how we choose to show up in life through our identity is everything. So, at a certain point, the values that we have in our outside lives versus our work lives, those end up merging at some point effortlessly. So, I think that it really works against us that we've been taught to compartmentalize who we are in our home lives and who we are in our workplaces. And so I think it makes it really easy to blur the lines and accept that we shouldn't be doing that, and how harmful that can end up being. So I think that with identity level work, it also helps us understand, like, oh, this is how I should be showing up versus this is how I want to be showing up in my life. And when we're again taking that inventory and we're reflecting on the values that are subconsciously leading us versus what we would actually like to be showing up as in the world, I think that that really helps to shift the potency with which we can show up in leading, our work, our lives, leading teams. Whenever we're doing that from a place of really taking ownership of who we are and who we're showing up as, it's a game changer in how we lead.
Yes, that is so wonderful. And the way you explain it, just really amazing. And how can someone begin shifting identity when they have been defined by old roles for years?
Yeah, I mean, especially, in the places, higher education, in legal, in government work, those are still so rooted in toxic work cultures. And so for places like that and for sectors like that, or in nonprofit, here all of the, there's so many people who are dealing with um defunding around, you know, resources for money that really was feeding inclusivity and that was supporting, minority cultures in the workplaces. And so with those things being taken away, I feel like it demands even more of us to really practice resilience in the way that we interact with life, resilience in our perspectives. And again, sometimes that means just accepting that this environment is not for me, which is a bigger and oftentimes tougher conversation to have. But, we're grinding ourselves down when we're forcing ourselves to stay in an environment that we know is not for us for any reason. And so I think that, there are different layers to understanding when we're being guided away from something. And I think that for those of us who have awareness to any degree, it becomes impossible to stay in an environment that we know is working against our well-being, because it'll end up showing up as physical symptoms, right? It'll end up showing up as that chronic exhaustion, as any of these other examples of burnout, but it'll end up taking away the quality of our lives. It's impossible to not have that happen. And like I said, I think any of us that have, any sort of awareness at this point can vouch for that. That it becomes less and less possible to be okay with what we're projected as to being acceptable in a workplace.
Yes, I love that because lasting change really does start with who we believe ourselves to be. And
Absolutely.
also, you mentioned habits that reflect who we want to be. What is one small habit that can have an outsized impact for leaders?
Oh man, I think the power of the pause is one of the most important habits that we can cultivate as humans in general, and especially in our cultures where we're taught to be more triggered and reactive and combative with each other. I think that the power of the pause really gives us that opportunity in any environment, in any situation, to really be able to say, okay, you get out of subconscious mode, right? So instead of just reacting the way that you might have been programmed to react or might have been acting out on autopilot for X many years, that pause really gives us the opportunity to, as you were saying, choose who you show up as. And especially when we can do that in the workplace, and especially in some of these more, high pace, high tension work environments, when we can really exercise the power of the pause, not only are we resetting our nervous systems in that moment, but we're giving other people an example of a leader who has the power and practice of doing that.
Yeah, that is so wonderful. And also, how do you keep that habit alive when the pressure is on?
Yeah, I think like anything else, it's in the practice. So in doing it when you're not at a heightened state of emotion, when you're not feeling triggered or reactive, choosing that pause when we're just in calm environments, when we're in typical conversations, that really strengthens our muscle of consciousness to then choose when we are in those more heightened states of reactivity to also practice it. It just becomes a muscle that becomes something that is activated within us instead of the frustration, the irritability, the combat. So it lies in the practice and consciously um activating that practice and building that muscle in our day to day.
Yes, that's so practical and inspiring. That kind of advice people can implement right away. And for the leader listening who has successfully, uh, like they're successful, but they're restless. What is that one first step toward enduring inner peace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, the slowing down and then getting quiet and understanding the root of that restlessness. I think in anything, understanding the why and whether that's a why for what you're choosing to do or a why and what you're choosing to not do. I think in quieting down and really understanding, because if how many people could you ask, well, what makes you feel restless? And their response is, I don't know.
Mm.
So, how can we choose to powerfully and confidently go in a different direction whenever restlessness stirs within us if we don't know what we need that to be? Or if we don't know if that is just a lack of fulfillment or if it's a lack of safety in the environment, if we don't know what value or need isn't being met, then it makes it that much tougher. It just ends up being a distraction, right? Restlessness can be a distraction and a diffuser of our power if we don't use it as a deeper understanding for what we actually need instead or on top of.
Yes, that's absolutely beautiful. And how can they balance that peace with the drive to keep growing?
Mhm. Yeah, so I feel like the drive to keep growing is one of those foundational things. I mean, that itself is a value, right? Growth
Mm.
is a value. And so for some people, like I have a hard time imagining someone who is interested in doing values work that doesn't innately have a drive for growth naturally. So I think that for the people who are just content with staying where they are, and and there are people that that's the identity that they've accepted, right?
Mm.
But I think that it's hard to have um, it's hard to have peace if you have that growth mentality. I feel like there's a lot of layers of work within that. But I think that for those that don't have any kind of growth mentality, I feel like that's definitely something that needs some deeper work as far as what is the root of that complacency? What is the root of that contentment? And really, what is it? Is it, maybe someone doesn't feel worthy of growing beyond where they are? Maybe someone's been told that they don't have what it takes to go beyond where they are. So, again, like understanding what the root is for that sense of complacency and lack of desire for elevating who they're showing up as in the world in some way. And that does not mean wanting to further climb the ladder. That does not mean wanting to get another milestone or more letters added behind your name. That could mean like, having more space for creative growth outside of your work environment. But for someone who is just content with not pushing beyond where they are as a means of self development and really evolving their human experience, I think that there's just a lot more, guided self reflection that is demanded for those folks.
Yes, that's like a reminder that peace isn't the absence of ambition, it's the true foundation for it. And when
Absolutely.
when someone's identity is deeply tied to their career, what is the first sign they might need a deeper redefinition?
Yeah, I think that noticing a lack of joy. So I feel like there's this term that I think it's like Sunday scaries, which is just laughable. But there are just so many people who they literally have created a habit where their weekends are spent dreading going back to work the next week. And that is one of the saddest things that I've ever heard. And so, again, like the identity thing, right? Like, it's one thing to take this topic that's being pushed and promoted in social media and has hashtags out the wazoo. It's another thing to adopt it as our identity where we can't even enjoy the time that we're away from work because we're dreading going back into that space. And if that is true and you mean it when you say that and you resonate with that Sunday scaries deeply, or just, discord about going back into your work environment, period, then I think that that is a deep demand for self reflection in what you would want instead. And I think that, again, like that's hard work for some people because they've been caught up in that grind for so long that the idea of doing something different in any way feels overwhelming in itself. Some people, I think, would rather stay in the comfort zone, as uncomfortable as it is, than to challenge themselves about what they would want instead. But I think that for those that feel discomfort and internal discord about the environment that they're in, um, you know, you're either going to stay in the physical environment and be unhappy inside, or you're going to do the uncomfortable work internally and decide if you absolutely need a shift from where you are. Because it's either a perspective situation or you're really just somewhere you're not supposed to be.
Yeah, that is so powerful that you just said. And how do they trust that slowing down won't derail their progress?
I mean, the answer is in the question, trust, right? So anytime, the answer is part of the question. So there is no guarantee in that. It is literally a thing too of building that relationship with your inner self, with your inner dialogue. The more that we make decisions, again, like going back to one of your earlier questions, like of saying no to things before taking them on because I just know myself and I know my relationship with my intuition is so deep and so strong and so, so rooted at this point in my life that I just know when something is a no. And so, but that took years of developing that, right? Of developing that muscle, of developing that trust and that self-respect. And so I think that, the more we practice making decisions that our intuition and our gut, like the trust your gut thing is one of the most overused but under applied touch-in points that I witness in people. So, whenever we can really learn what our relationship with our gut and with our intuition is and start practicing that in the world with even the smallest of decisions, where do you want to go for dinner? Like, give it a second and see what comes through, and then just practice that with bigger decisions. It just becomes a thing of building trust with yourself that you can have a bigger trust of where you're being guided and why and how.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And this conversation is so, so, so powerful. And thank you for joining and sharing so much of your knowledge, your experiences, your stories. This is so beautiful. And if after this very beautiful conversation, my listeners want to connect with you, then what's the best way?
Yeah, my website is powerhouseswithpurpose.com. I can be found on LinkedIn. My full name is Samantha Jump, and that's how you can find me on LinkedIn. And all my Powerhouses with Purpose stuff is right there. My email address is connect at Powerhouses with Purpose. I've got a couple of free guides on the website right now that work with both mindset and taking inventory of our values. So get into those, like just start being curious. And that's what the work is really rooted in.
Yes, and I will make sure to attach all the details and links below so that the listeners can find them easily and get in touch with you and know more from you because you're a wonderful person. And thank you again for joining us and sharing all this with us. And to all my listeners, Samantha Jumps shows us that leadership anchored in values doesn't just transform teams, it transforms lives. If you have been leading at the expense of all your well being, maybe it's time to slow down, check your compass, and let your values set the course. Thank you.